Well, this has been an introduction, quite a true introduction. I graduated as an engineer, raised in an Arab family, a very normal kind of family in Argentina, and educated in a good school, an English school, and so forth. And, following a little bit at that time, the kind of objective of being successful, right? Successful meant, having a good job, making money, and the rest of the things that are supposed to give you happiness. And I did that, and I studied 6 years engineering, and as you heard, I worked at Ford. But actually, I started to develop more interest in going and coming to America and not staying in Argentina. At least to be settled in America, I didn't know how long, but to work in America. And at that time, remember, this was about 1969, 70, it was the whole flower power revolution and all that. So I decided to live in San Francisco, of course. And but then I went to the embassy and they said, well, you have to wait 14 months for the visa. We cannot give you just the green card right away. So I said, okay, then I can wait. And I worked at Ford, doing numbers, cracking numbers all the time, finance analyst. And I can say, well, it was a successful career at that time. But during that whole process, that whole idea of going to America and working, already had contacts with IBM, and somehow they were expecting me. And then I thought, okay, then I also will do some MBA at Stanford University. And then when I come back to Argentina, oh man, I really made it, with all these titles and careers and everything. That was before starting work in Ford, right? By the end of these 14 months, I felt so hollow and really, this was not it. Something was really missing. And I think it's quite important that it's missing while you are successful, not when you are not successful, because then you can blame, the lack of success. And then you strive to succeed because you think that will be the answer to your hollowness. But this hollowness never left. I don't think it's something so special about me. I think many people feel that kind of dissatisfaction about things. And once you feel, you taste dissatisfaction, then it kind of starts to spread in so many of the different aspects of your life. And then everything is colored by that dissatisfaction. It became quite difficult at the end. So one day I was working at Ford, and then I got a call from my father saying the visa came. The next day I resigned. and then I started to prepare my trip. That was I think December 1970. I was 25. And then I went to New York. I stayed 1 month. And of course, they gave me the green card at that time. They gave me that. But I knew that the green card allowed me 1 year around the world. 1 year. And then if I came within that year, I wouldn't lose it. So I said, okay, let's travel around and see the world. And then I went to England. And in England, I had a lot of contact with the whole artistic, I was friend of an Argentine artist, so she took me to all these places, the Roundhouse and all these things, and so much freedom and all the hippies, like dancing and all that. I said, oh, this is it, I'm coming from Argentina governed by military, I really found it, And I kept on going, like weekend after weekend to this place. And then at the end I said, well, this is a facade, you take all your stuff wherever you go. Unless I fix something within me, then this will fall like other things fell before. So anyhow, I made very good friends with an Argentine in London who was married, an Indian woman, psychoanalyst, and she was married to an Argentinian. And then I started to talk with her and say that maybe I should go to India. And then she really encouraged me. What I didn't like was to go overland but like people, like backpackers did, because then it was not comfortable, and I was very used to comfort. So then she gave me the great idea. She said, "Why don't you buy a car?" And I said, "Oh wow, I love to drive. Yes, why not? You know." So I went to Köln, to Germany, and I bought this Volkswagen Beetle. It was 100,000 kilometers already worn, and I paid $400 for it. So I said, okay. And I knew very clearly I wanted a complete change of culture. You know, I was no longer interested in the culture that the Western world was giving, which I knew. And so I decided to go, instead of going overland and through, you know, Yugoslavia and all these countries, you know, there were like the Iron Curtain, I decided to go by North Africa. But one thing I forgot to say is that I was first baptized as an Orthodox Christian, and then my mother decided we should be baptized as a Catholic. And you know, when I was a teenager, I kind of became an agnostic. There were so many things that I couldn't get answers, you know, from the religions that I was practicing or I thought I belonged to. And I suppose at that age, you know, in my career, 20s and so forth, it felt a little bit like having something of your own, to be so rebellious. It was maybe silly. I didn't really deepen so much, you know, like in the different religions at that point. But I reached that point when I was traveling. I also felt this hollowness from the spiritual side, which is the same as the hollowness I was mentioning, but it was because also I didn't have a religion to back me up. Religion is something that, you know, supports you when you feel this kind of hollowness. So I started my trip north of Africa, and eventually I went to Middle East. I spent some time with my family, relatives, and so forth. Went to Istanbul, and then I went all the way through these countries that you cannot really travel today, you know, Iran, Afghanistan, and it was beautiful. And in Afghanistan, I met an American who was coming back from Israel with his wife, and he started to talk to me about Buddhism and about Tibetan Buddhism. And for me, it was like a mess. I had absolutely no idea about Buddhism, Hinduism, or anything like that. But when I left Argentina, someone gave me this book by Uspensky, you know, In Search of the Miraculous, which is based on the teachings of Gurdjieff. And so I started to read that book, and that really gave me some kind of inspiration, because it immediately spoke about something within oneself that one had to discover, some potential, infinite potential or whatever. And I like that. I mean, it didn't speak to me about a God or anything like that. It's like a new kind of approach to spirituality. I couldn't make contact with them in England, although I tried 4 times. But I had that book, and I went to India with that book in hand. And then, but then I met this man that was telling me about Tibetan Buddhism and how great they were. He was a bit, I mean, exaggerated, I know now, but maybe that's what I needed at that point. He said, when you go to Nepal and then you go to the bathroom, it's spotlessly clean, you know. Anybody that went to Nepal knows that, you know, well, it's probably the dirtiest place on earth, you know. But anyhow, obviously these were some ingredients, you know, that made me go along. And then, well, finally I reach India. To make it short, I go to Nepal. And after 15 days, this guy comes and says, look, I have a house in Bodhanath, and it's a bit big for me, and if you want to come, you share, you know, like you can share the rent. And there is a Lama who is up in a hill. It was Kopan Monastery. The Lama speaks English, so we can go and take some teachings there, you know, because he gives some teachings on Buddhism. So first I was a little bit dubious. What am I going to see there or whatever? For me, everything was a mess. I thought that Nepal was all Tibet and Tibetans. I didn't even know Tibet had been invaded by the Chinese, you know, so total lack of knowledge, political knowledge, like spiritual knowledge, everything. It was like a white cloth. And so I went there, and that was my first encounter with Islam. It was quite special because there were these photographers from Paris Match taking pictures of the hippie movement and people who were going to get teachings in the East. And this picture actually, like after 10 years, I think, a friend of mine was walking in the streets in Paris and saw this picture on the cover of Paris Match. And then it is, well, what happened with these guys? You know, was the article 10 years later. And I'm the guy, the beard, you know, on one side is the Lama, and on the other side there's one funny guy with beard, with funny crossed legs. A hippoid, not really hippie, but, you know, some kind of... So that was my first contact with the Dharma. And I can't say I understood much of what the Lama said. His English was a very kind of pidgin English, and my English also was not so good. But I felt the environment was very inspiring. In some way, it was very different. So I kept on going 2 or 3 times, and I made friends with a Norwegian girl. And once we were having some tea after a talk, and then the subject of meditation comes up. And for me, up to that point, meditation was meant to think about something, because that's the way, at least in Argentina at that time, it was used, you know, in the media, like the president, like is meditating on how to solve the strikers, you know, or whatever like that. So I thought, well, it was like thinking. And then she said, no, it's not to think. And really that was like a shock, because for the first time in my life, I heard that there could be wisdom in non-thinking. And that was really revolutionary for me. I was sick of thinking. I was just, I mean, the whole story seems very glamorous, but actually it was quite painful. My whole trip in the car and, you know, one country after another. And I knew what I was leaving behind, but I wanted to change my life, but I didn't know exactly what I was heading to, you know, if I really would find something. So, you know, like this hollowness became more and more pronounced, but that really gave me some inspiration. So immediately I finished my meeting with her. I went up the hill and knocked on the door of this Lama, and I said, teach me to meditate. And I must have been quite desperate to do such a thing, I think. But I did it. And then he said, look, I'm going tomorrow to Japan, but you can go to Dharamsala, and I'll write you a letter to my teacher. So he wrote a letter, and well, you can't imagine the kind of stories I made up mentally about that letter. It was in Tibetan, and what is he saying there? What did he see in me, you know, and all these different things. So I came to Dharamsala, I gave the letter to the Lama, he left, he read it, he said, okay, come next Tuesday, there will be a translator, I'll give you some teaching. You know. Of course, you know, when I learned how to read the letter just said, you know, this guy wants meditation, give him some meditation. No, that was all he said. And so I started to go to this Lama. He was very simple, a yogi, and living in a very simple hut. But his problems with the translator, he was just a goofy, you know. He was just never come on time or never show up. We would be waiting in this room with the Lama and he wouldn't show up. You know, I started to see the problems of depending on a translator. At some point, then I had to decide, because my year was running out, I had to decide to come back to America to keep my green card running. But I really found that Buddhism was so interesting and so deep, and it really made a change. I was so much drawn to it, so I had to decide. And I remember I was talking with a couple of friends, an Italian woman and another American, and the American said, yeah, go back and you work, and then you can always come back here, you know. And and do some practice or whatever. And this Italian very good friend of mine said, "Now just stay," she said. That's exactly what I needed. No? So I wrote back to my family, who, by the way, my parents had already bought tickets to meet me in San Francisco. So I canceled the whole trip and everything, and that was a bit traumatic for my family. And I decided to stay. And I think that was the great decision I did. Then the Dalai Lama opened this library of Tibetan archives where they were giving courses on Tibetan and also on Buddhism, so I enrolled. And after a few months, it became too scholastic, too academic. And I was, again, this was not the meditation I thought I would receive, a meditation where I was taught not to think. And it was all the contrary. I was taking notes like in the university and, like putting them in the shelf. And it was exactly the same thing and I had been doing. I said, this is not what I want, And all these yogi stories about Tilopa, Naropa, and all these great masters of those teachings of meditation were always in my mind. So I decided, oh, I have to change. And I went to see a Lama, and he sent me to my teacher in Manali, who is here in a picture with his wife. And that is another breakthrough in my career, so to speak, because the first one, ironically, was with this girl who told me about meditation. The second one was when I met this man. This man was Abboud, and he lived in Manali in his house, which is like a monastery, but he had a family, wife, 4 kids, and monks, and nobody spoke English. And I had my background of Tibetan there. So I started to realize that Tibetan I was taught was not exactly the way people spoke. So I simplified my Tibetan. I said, if they don't speak properly, why should I try to speak by the book, So I simplified it very much, and that opened all this, broke down this inhibition I had that didn't allow me to speak in Dharamsala. And I started to speak directly. I would see him every week, maybe a couple of times, and he had such a great sense of humor. I could, say, so I had some conversation with him. It was really great. And after some time, I moved to the house, and I lived 8 months in the house. And that really did it, because, of course, having to speak Tibetan all the time really went very well. I became translator. It was 1973. And so they were calling me to translate at that time. And after that, then I started to do retreats. He died shortly afterwards. I was only 1.5 years with him. But I became part of the family. It was so significant to me to be there in that kind of environment. I never was drawn to monasticism or anything, but that was the life I really liked. And so I started to live, and I spent, 12 years in India and the last 2 years in Nepal. In a retreat place, I built a house there, really a nice house, which I had to do 1-year retreat there, according to one of my teachers, so I had a house built. And so why did I build a house? Because I went first, the retreat center was amazing. It was like Tibet completely. Half of the people who came from Tibet, they just crossed the border at that time. And then, there were like about 100 houses, and all yogis and yoginis just practicing. It was really like the time of old times of real contemplative tradition. It was exactly what I wanted. And so I asked, what house are you going to give me? And this horrible house with small windows, black, because they burn wood, on open fires. And then I said, how much would it cost to build a house? Well, how big would it be? So then it's like 3 yards by 3 yards, and then another one is like 1.5 yards by 3 yards. Like a whole is 4.5 yards by 3 yards with a division. And $150. I said, okay, I can afford that. But I want big windows, because I really like big windows and look at the sky and everything. So when I came back, then I came to visit my parents, and at that time, then I also met the person who would become my wife to this day. So my whole program of starting with 1-year retreat and keeping on, I loved retreats. I did 6 months in, 6 months out, 7 months in, like that for many years, and I loved it. And it was totally secluded retreat. And I said, okay, I start with 1 year and I keep on going. I had finished a 7-year relationship with a woman. And so that was perfect. But then I met my wife, so I couldn't really, she couldn't come back with me. And of course I had to do this retreat. And so I did this 1-year retreat in 2 steps, like 6 months, then she came, and then 6 months. And then I knew that I had to go back to Argentina. But that was after 14 years of living in India and Nepal, so it was quite a reasonable time. And my parents were still alive, and I had like my very good family and everything, and I was coming back to this life. So, and I saw that in Argentina there was big interest on the Dharma in '83 when I went back. That was, I looked like something, I looked like this when I went back. This was my last years in Nepal. And then after some time, then we invited with my wife 2 of my teachers, and they started this center, Dongyuling, in 1986. So I had to start to give some talks, something that I never did before. And well, it's going on till now, 29 years. And in 1992, but my life really changed in the way that I had to make a living. Until that point, my parents were very kind. They always supported me financially, so I didn't have to worry about that. But at that time, getting married, having a kid, and so forth, of course. So for many years, I did business. I went back to my Arab roots, and I made business with my wife, imports, airports, until 2000, more or less. But in 1992, then we heard that the Dalai Lama was coming to South America. And at that time, we didn't know how to do it. I was in the organizing committee, and then they were sending very often like people, ambassadors from the Office of Tibet to Argentina to teach us how to do it, because it's not like a regular Lama visit. I mean, he's a head of state, and you know, you need security, you need so many things. So once there was this, like one of the heads of the Office of Tibet that came, and there was a talk on cultural Tibet, not Buddhism or anything. And of course he spoke perfect English, he lived in New York. So I thought, well, I was called as a translator. So I thought he would speak in English. But he spoke in Tibetan from the very first word till the end, completely in Tibetan. And then when we went back to the house, he said, you have to translate for His Holiness when he comes. And I really, my stomach crunched completely, because that was big responsibility. One thing was translating for my teachers, and only Dharma, which is very technical. And then this would, His Holiness, I could hardly understand the word when I heard him. You know, he speaks so fast, and it's a different kind of pronunciation and stuff like that. So I said, no, but you know what? I tried to kind of sneak away from that, but he said, no, well, yeah, I know that once before he came with another translator, but it didn't work very well. You have to do it. I said, okay. After 1.5 years, I can train myself. I bought them cassettes. So that then I became, at that point, I translated for him, and that was 1992, his first visit, and then that was one of the pictures, I think, which I find very funny. This is probably someone was saying something in Spanish, and I was translating simultaneously into Syrian. And then, well, since 1992, I was always called to be as interpreter in all the Latin American visits, which is something totally, I mean, unthinkable for me at that time. And even now, I cannot believe that honor is amazing. To be close to him all the time when I travel is amazing. So, well, anyhow, that's a little bit, I carry on with my practice, and I carry on with my Dharma activities, and I do a lot of translating for other lamas apart from His Holiness, which is only once every 5 years or 7 years or 3 years. So my contact with the Dharma is like constant. My life was totally changed by Dharma, by Buddhism. My outlook of life, my practice, and the way it kind of starts to suffuse, you know, like different aspects of my life in so many subtle ways and obvious ways as well. I cannot tell. It's become part of my life, and so spiritual life really kind of filled up that hollowness that I found before. Although there's always this kind of sadness of not really coming completely to terms with my basic being, or what we're calling here the true self. But this is my spiritual journey. I'm in the path, and this is my life. I'm just trying to get there in many ways. And of course, I'm very distracted and unfortunately still attracted to mundane life. But I'm working at it. So, well, this is a little bit my small presentation of what I've written on.